Welcome to today's episode of Psych with Sigmund, where we'll be exploring the fascinating world of exposure therapy. I'm your host, Sigmund, and I'm excited to dive into this important psychological concept that has been helping people overcome anxiety disorders for decades. So, what is exposure therapy? In simple terms, it's a type of therapy that involves gradually exposing individuals to the things they fear or avoid. This can be a situation, object, or activity that triggers anxiety or panic. The goal of exposure therapy is not to push individuals beyond their comfort zones, but to help them build confidence and mastery over their fears. But why is exposure therapy important in psychology? Well, anxiety disorders are among the most common mental health conditions, affecting millions of people worldwide. These disorders can significantly impact daily life, relationships, and overall well-being. By understanding how exposure therapy works, we can appreciate the importance of facing our fears and building resilience in the face of adversity. The concept of exposure therapy has its roots in behavioral psychology, specifically in the work of psychologists such as Joseph Wolpe and Hans Eysenck. They developed the idea that anxiety is learned through classical conditioning, where a neutral stimulus becomes associated with a feared stimulus, leading to an anxious response. Exposure therapy aims to break this association by gradually exposing individuals to the feared stimulus in a controlled and supportive environment. One of the key psychological theories that explains exposure therapy is the habituation model. This model suggests that repeated exposure to a feared stimulus leads to a decrease in anxiety responses over time. In other words, the more we expose ourselves to something we fear, the less anxious we become. Research has consistently shown that exposure therapy is an effective treatment for anxiety disorders, including post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, social anxiety disorder, and specific phobias. Let's take a look at some significant research findings related to exposure therapy. A classic study by Foa et al. 1991 demonstrated the effectiveness of exposure therapy in treating individuals with PTSD. The study found that participants who received exposure therapy showed significant reductions in symptoms of PTSD compared to those who received other forms of therapy. More recent studies have replicated these findings, highlighting the importance of exposure therapy in treating anxiety disorders. In addition to its theoretical background and research evidence, exposure therapy has numerous practical applications. For example, it can be used to help individuals overcome specific phobias, such as a fear of spiders or heights. It can also be used to treat social anxiety disorder by gradually exposing individuals to social situations that trigger anxiety. Furthermore, exposure therapy can be adapted for use in different cultural and clinical contexts, making it a versatile and effective treatment approach. To illustrate the concept of exposure therapy in action, let's consider an example. Imagine someone who has a fear of public speaking. This person might avoid giving presentations or speaking up in meetings due to feelings of anxiety and self-consciousness. An exposure therapist would work with this individual to create a hierarchy of feared situations, starting with small steps, such as speaking in front of a small group of friends or family members. Gradually, the individual would be exposed to more challenging situations, such as giving a presentation in front of a large audience. Another example is the use of virtual reality, VR technology, in exposure therapy. VR can provide a safe and controlled environment for individuals to confront their fears, such as a fear of flying or a fear of heights. Research has shown that VR-based exposure therapy can be just as effective as traditional exposure therapy in reducing symptoms of anxiety disorders. In conclusion, exposure therapy is a powerful tool for overcoming anxiety disorders. By understanding how this concept works, we can appreciate the importance of facing our fears and building resilience in the face of adversity. As my experience with clients has shown me, exposure therapy can be a life-changing experience that helps individuals reclaim their lives from anxiety. So, what can you take away from today's episode? First, remember that anxiety disorders are treatable, and exposure therapy is an effective approach to managing symptoms. Second, don't be afraid to face your fears. Gradual exposure to the things you fear can help you build confidence and mastery over your anxiety. And finally, if you're struggling with an anxiety disorder, consider seeking help from a mental health professional who specializes in exposure therapy. That's all for today's Psych with Sigmund. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And, until next time, may your ego find balance between pleasure and reality.